There comes a moment in the life of a country when its reflection becomes too honest to ignore, when the mask drops, when the story we tell about ourselves cracks open and shows us something we can no longer explain away. That moment for the United States did not arrive on a battlefield or in the ashes of a tower or in the chaos of an invasion. It arrived quietly, violently, and unmistakably in the black water of the Caribbean Sea. A boat left Venezuela, a small vessel, the kind that carries more desperation than threat. The administration said it was tied to drug trafficking. They offered no proof, no satellite images, no seized cargo, no verifiable chain of intelligence, not even the dignity of a coherent explanation. They simply declared it, and then they fired a missile. The first strike tore the boat apart, and bodies were thrown into the waves, flames rising on the surface like a warning from the sea itself. A scene any lawful nation would treat with caution and an immediate call for investigation. A scene that should have triggered a pause in judgment. 2 men survived, 2 human beings still clinging to life. They held on to broken pieces of wood because the ocean showed them a mercy their killers would not. And then the order came, to kill them all. A second strike, a deliberate, conscious choice to kill the last living witnesses. These men were not combatants. They were not armed. They were not a threat. They were shipwrecked. They were wounded. They were protected under every conceivable interpretation of international humanitarian law, and they were killed anyway. This was a violation of the Geneva Conventions. This was a violation of the prohibition on orders of no quarter. This was a violation of the War Crimes Act. This was a violation of every legal, ethical, and human standard the United States claims to defend. There is no self-defense here. There is no imminent threat here. There is no justification that can survive the light of day, which is why the administration immediately tried to manufacture one. They reached first for the language of terrorism and narcotics. They tried to transform a criminal suspicion into an act of war, but drug trafficking is not war. It does not authorize lethal force. It does not give any country the right to launch missiles at foreign nationals on the open sea. It does not create an armed conflict under international law. That door is closed. So they reached for a darker doctrine, domestic authorization. The idea that if the president signs off, anything becomes legal. That's not law. That's the collapse of law. This is the logic of a government that believes power is the only authority it needs. And then they paired that doctrine with the Israeli concept that believing a target might be dangerous is enough to kill them. Belief becomes evidence. Suspicion becomes proof. Power becomes permission. When a nation relies on these doctrines to justify killing the shipwrecked, it has abandoned decency. It has stepped away from the rule of law and into the world of improvised legality. It has become an empire writing its own commandments in real time, confident that no one can stop it. But the consequences are far wider than the killing of 2 men. Because the moment one strike is proven unlawful, the entire operation becomes tainted. The other strikes on other boats in the region become suspect. Every missile fired becomes a question that must now be answered. If this one strike was unlawful, then what about the others? If survivors were killed here, what happened elsewhere? If evidence was absent here, what proof did they have before? If this was justified with lies, what else was? Once a single act is shown to be illegal, the presumption flips. The burden rests entirely on the United States to prove that every other strike was lawful, and they cannot do that. Not with the shifting explanations, not with the contradictions, not with the silence where evidence should be. And this is why they are desperate to change the story. This is why they are talking about Venezuela. This is why they are whispering about regime change. This is why they are pushing the narrative that Maduro must go. They are trying to bury a war crime under a revolution. They are gambling that if Maduro falls, then history will rewrite itself. That if they topple him, the narrative will become one of liberation instead of illegality. They believe that removing Maduro would retroactively justify the strikes. They believe that a geopolitical victory can wash away the blood in the water. They believe that if the region erupts into chaos, the public will stop asking questions about why the United States killed 2 men who could not swim away. This is not strategy. It's not foreign policy. It's panic and political survival. It's not leadership. It's just desperation. And what may be even more shocking than the administration's behavior are the lawmakers who continue to stand behind it. You see, this should have been their exit ramp. This should have been the moment that they said that even loyalty has limits. This should have been the instant they saw the road ahead and realized that following a collapsing administration into the darkness will not save them. This should have been the day they walked away and said that killing the shipwrecked is not patriotism. It's not leadership, and not something they will allow their names to defend. But instead, they doubled down. Not because they believe the justification, not because they trust the intelligence, not because they are brave, but because they are fools. They have convinced themselves that if they stay loyal and Maduro falls, the scandal disappears. They think a new government in Caracas will rewrite history. They are telling themselves that regime change will make everything legal in retrospect. They are betting their careers and their legacies on a fantasy that has burned every administration that has ever tried it. They are hoping a dictator's fall will erase their own cowardice. They are hoping a crisis will eclipse their moral failure. They are hoping the world will forget that they defended the killing of survivors. And they will be wrong. History does not erase war crimes just because a flag is planted somewhere new. History does not forgive lawmakers who defend the indefensible. History does not forget the names of people who stood in front of a camera and said that suspicion is reason enough to kill. Congress is responsible now. They must act. They must investigate. They must subpoena footage. They must challenge the administration's lies. They must demand proof for every strike in the campaign. They must face the reality that a nation that uses domestic authorization to justify killing the defenseless has begun to abandon the rule of law entirely. And if this Congress refuses to act, if it refuses to investigate, if it pretends it does not see what the whole world can now see clearly, then something even darker takes root in the heart of this nation. The moment Congress chooses silence is the moment the United States steps out of the light of law and into the shadows where empires rot from within. That silence is not an accident. It is consent. And consent becomes policy, and policy becomes precedent. If they allow this to stand, then every future administration will inherit the same power. The ability to assign guilt without evidence. The ability to kill without oversight. The ability to rewrite legality to fit the crime. The ability to point at a drowning man and call him a threat. The ability to kill survivors in the water and declare it national security. If this is allowed, then the next atrocity is not a possibility, but a certainty. And we will not have moral standing left. None. Not abroad, not at home, not in the face of any future crisis. We will have forfeited the right to condemn Russia when it targets civilians. We will have forfeited the right to challenge China when it claims suspicion as justification for killing. We will have forfeited the right to speak of human rights as anything other than a marketing line, because a country that kills the shipwrecked cannot lecture anyone about human dignity. Now, we can still stop this decline, but we have to be honest about what it requires. It requires courage in a generation of lawmakers who have forgotten they never had any. It requires restraint in a government addicted to escalation. It requires the humility to admit when we are wrong, something this administration has shown no capacity for. And it requires a level of public moral clarity that has been numbed by years of chaos. But if we refuse, then we must face the truth. The collapse of a republic is not always a thunderclap. Sometimes it is just a series of small surrenders, a silence in the face of cruelty, a shrug at the erosion of law, a willingness to believe a lie because the truth requires action, a decision to let someone else deal with it later. And then suddenly there is no later, and the crimes we excused yesterday become the country we live in tomorrow. The end of democracy does not always come with tanks in the street. Sometimes it just comes with a drone strike no one wants to explain, a press conference where no questions are answered, a Congress too afraid or too foolish to confront a president who has crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed, and a public trained to accept atrocity if it is packaged as patriotism. And then years from now, when our children ask what happened, we will not be able to blame a foreign enemy. There is no enemy to blame here. The enemy is us. The enemy is silence. The enemy is the people who defended this indefensible thing because they thought it would protect them. The enemy is every lawmaker who thought loyalty to a collapsing administration was a substitute for integrity. The enemy is every official who believed domestic authorization could turn murder into policy. And they will ask us when America began to fall. And the easy answer will be that it happened all at once. But the truth is more painful because it happened slowly, and it happened through compromise. It happened through cowardice. It happened when the law was bent to justify a crime instead of confronting it. It happened when two men clung to debris in the Caribbean Sea, and the most powerful nation on earth chose to kill them rather than to save them. And it happened when the people capable of stopping it chose instead to wait and hope that a miracle or a regime change or a political shift would erase the stain. But stains don't disappear on their own. They spread. And the question now is not what happened to those two men. We know what happened. The question is what happens to us. Because if we let this moment pass without truth, without accountability, without the courage to say that a line was crossed and must never be crossed again, then we will have named our future, and it will not be a republic bound by law. It will be an empire bound by its own power. We can still choose differently, but time is running out, and the line is there in the water. The world is watching. The law is watching. And whether Congress wants to admit it or not, history is watching too. And we have a chance. We can still pull back. We can still demand justice. We can still refuse to accept this. But if we don't, if we allow this moment to pass, the day will come when we look back and understand that the moment America began to lose its soul was not at war, not in crisis, not in chaos, but on a night in the Caribbean when two men floating on broken debris were killed in our name, and the people who could have stopped it chose not to. Defiance till death.